So you would be on the 4th. Yeah. And okay. Number 1 right away. You can choose. I am number here.
Okay, so pleased to welcome all back after the lunch. I hope you had a good lunch. We had a good GGGI side event also downstairs that several of you attended. So before I introduce the afternoon panel, there were some people who were asking about the bus for tomorrow. So just a practical announcement: the buses will be parking outside the conference center on the street in front of the flag poles. They will park there from 6:30 and they will leave at 7 sharp. So you should come between 6:30 and 7, otherwise you'll miss them. Secondly, in the last session of today, we will be reviewing the draft Bangkok statement. That draft statement is already available outside the door, so please go out and take a look. There are 100 copies there. There should probably be. Oops. Ah, yes, and you can also download it from there. So please have a look at that draft statement before the last session starts. Now, to our afternoon plenary session, Financing Green Industrial Development. I'm pleased to introduce Mr. Stefan Sickars, Director, Department of Environment of UNIDO, who will moderate the session, and he will be introducing the speakers. So please give a hand to the afternoon panel.
Thank you very much. Welcome to the last somewhat technical panel of the day and of the conference. The discussion on financing green industrial development. And we have today an excellent panel up here for us, and I would like to introduce you to the speakers. Mr. Divuhu Rafulu, he is the director of the National Cleaner Production Center of South Africa, and we will discuss with him, or he will bring to us some information about demand. Then we have two representatives from development financing institutions. Mr. Hideaki Iwasaki is the country director of the Thailand resident mission of the Asian Development Bank. And Mrs. Farah Hussain is a senior financial officer of the Treasury in the World Bank. Finally, we have Mrs. Yuki Yasui. She is the Asia Pacific Coordination Manager of the UNEP Finance Initiative. And without further ado, I would like to ask you, Divuhu, to start and give us your first impression. And we will go through the session, not quite without further ado, I have to apologize. We will go through the session in order to maybe guide your thinking a little bit. Two things that we, among others, will bring out, hopefully, is what you might consider important barriers for seeking investment into green industry. And there we are asking also your gut feeling and what kind of financing would be most effective to support green industry. You can start thinking these questions in a number of options. To answer them will be available to you in our app, and you can, during or right after the first set of interventions, I welcome you to use the app, and also please feel free to use the app to actually ask questions to our esteemed presenters and discussion partners. So, Divuhu, floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and welcome back after lunch. I hope I will keep you awake. I'm also representing the RecipeNet global network for cleaner production, resource efficiency and cleaner production. And one of the most common discussion every time we meet is that out of the work that the centers, the cleaner production centers are doing, there is a challenge with access to financing resources, and also there's a challenge that a lot of the work that we are doing does not necessarily give pragmatic product, because you need to implement to get those results, and we're not getting that. It is also important to note that with the changing nature of discussion from green to circular economy and all sustainable development objectives, for a developing country or country in transition, it is also critical for us to have this discussion because, one, a lot of the financial mechanism available in these countries are still conventional, so they do not recognize independent power producers' needs for financing, green finance. They do not recognize the risks associated with green financing because it's not easy for them to look at issues of insurance, to look at issues of return on investment, because these areas of investment are not yet tested in those countries. So you have a demand for finance mechanism in this area because the financial institutions have not clearly defined how they are going to carry the risks associated. Now what you end up happening is that in countries where their own physical budget as a country can afford incentives to industry, there is some level of funding going on. And in the case of South Africa, I've chosen to give you an example of what we have been doing lately to try and bridge the gap of financing in this area and to bring the financial institutions in South Africa into making them interested in funding green economy. So I'm going to share with you a few slides. I will jump and go to what I think is most critical because it's important for you to understand what we are looking at. Now, the challenge is that through cleaner production, you identify areas of investments for companies at company level, at sectoral level, and also at national level. And these areas are most likely virgin or what you call green investment area opportunities. And what we have now decided is that for each of these investment opportunity, you need to develop at least a basic business plan that also shows feasibility of return on investment for the financial institution to get interested and also to have confidence in what shall come out. So financial investment will require you to have a reliable database of projects, will require you to have a bankable project, and the bankable project in the definition of return on investment, ability to recover or recoup their cost. And we decided to have workshops with financial institutions. And the aim was to create awareness, but to also create an opportunity for them to access projects that are available. This would vary from an SMME level to a multi-corporation level, and also from projects that are CSI or CS, corporate social investment oriented, to projects that are enterprise related. Now, in the unique case of South Africa, we have the Department of Trade and Industry, where the center it's managed with a number of incentive schemes to industry. And these incentive schemes, we have adopted them to be used as collateral to some of the identified projects. Now, when a bank or a financial institution argues about insurance or return on investment, we are able to put forward a collateral or an investment injection from government that helps them. At the same time, what also helped was we started a project on independent power producers, where people apply for license and we allow them to access this finance, and it will be either a need or a solution based, which is linked to a financial institution and a government incentive scheme, either tax related or a grant-related incentive scheme, to ensure that the process is available. What we did to attract government's attention is to link all this to the Sustainable Development Goal and show that this is a vehicle for government to reduce carbon emission, to also achieve social imperative priorities, and also to achieve environmental objectives of the country. And energy efficiency and energy management becomes the simplest process to achieve this process. So we have now put into the system about 12 projects, and 10 of the 12 are funded by the top 4 banks in the country, including the World Bank and IFC. So you're starting to see the value. Now we use that information to influence how the others could then participate in the process. This information would be available for there are about 140 cleaner production centers in the world, and there are about 88 of those who are RecipNet members, and about 80 of those are actively participating in the same way that the South African Center is doing. So you will be able, if you're a financial person, you will be able to access these institutions, and they will be able to give you information. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Divuhu, I would like to ask a quick follow-up question out of interest. So when you look at the need and your remarkable initiative, how far could you get into covering the need for green investments that you perceive? Is it already a sizable approach into the market, or is it more a learning experience for the actors? How would you characterize it?
For existing industry that are adopting or we are converting into green, the need is there, and it's good, it's reliable. But because it's a new area of business, everything is still trial and testing, and we are learning. But the opportunities are enormous.
Thank you very much for characterizing so nicely in your presentation the opportunities that are out there, and also the needs, and also your very recommendable efforts to bridge gaps. And I would like now to give the floor to Mr. Hideaki Iwasaki, and maybe you can advise us about the Asian Development Bank's approaches to make green finance available to enterprises. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, I'm from the Asian Development Bank, and probably I need to put some disclaimer up front, because ADB is owned by governments. 67 governments. The focus of this conference is industry, and we are a bit remote, a bit far away. We deal with primarily governments, which are borrowing from us, and some private sector entities. But we don't really have direct interaction or interface with industry groups or industry community in general. So there's a limit to what we can do. So in this presentation, I'll be talking about our products. One is green bonds. And actually, I have one colleague from a similarly structured organization, and it seems that there'll be more detailed presentation on this. So I would just quickly go over this. ADB issues green bonds. And to do that, we have a framework which is certified by a third party. And there's a list of projects to which the proceeds of the bonds will be utilized. This is, I think, probably quite obvious. Yeah, there are some criteria, which are the projects, which are the criteria to be applied, and what are the types of projects. They are listed here. This is about ADBs issuing bonds. We also advise our clients in issuing their green bonds. There are some limited cases, actually. We don't have many cases. So we do both. This is about green bonds. Because we are a bank and we have several instruments, one is concessional financing, and also we provide guarantees to de-risk and probably, hopefully, bring in better term financing to projects. And also we have grant money, which can be used to prepare projects. And this green finance catalyzing facility is basically to combine all of these with private sector resources to create a vehicle to mobilize more private sector resources into projects which are green. I have several slides here. Basically, the challenge is balancing these two pillars, achieving financial sustainability and achieving environmental sustainability. And the typical, actually, if all the instruments, all available resources are utilized, tapped, then the structure of financing would be like this. This is an ideal case. And we have proposed this to several governments. And in one of the countries in the region, we are running a technical assistance to structure this. Hopefully, we'll be successful in getting this into implementation. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
I would like to go, if you don't mind, ask you one clarifying question. You were discussing both the fact that you were presenting both the fact that you're issuing green bonds and that you're also advising on issuing green bonds. Could you, from your understanding for the financing need of industries where I would say extremely large cases would be 50 million, often it's 1 million, 3 million, 5 million. How would possibly an instrument of green bonds be utilizable by companies on that financing level, which is normally way below, I would assume, what a green bond would look like? Could you inform us a little bit about your views on that?
Okay, this may be my personal view, but obviously there's transaction cost involved in valuing the benefits and also going through all the certification process. So if the amount involved is too small, probably the transaction cost would outweigh. So you would probably need 30, 40 million above, I think, for green bond issuance to make sense, in my view. Actually, of course, this is not an expert view, but just looking at how these projects are handled within the bank. Yeah.
I'm very happy to come back to that, possibly at least, later in the discussion with a little annotation that there are considerations of bundling projects into green bonds using indicators, multiple recipients. But we can come to that later. And now I would like to invite Mrs. Farah Hussein to maybe present what you have to tell us, to broadly speaking the same topic, but certainly from a very different viewpoint.
Sure, thank you very much.
Please.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation to speak at this seminar. Definitely, I can see that I found myself in very distinguished and eminent company. I work for the World Bank Treasury, and I've come from Washington, D.C. So the World Bank Treasury issued the first green bond in the world back in 2008. In fact, it's been exactly 10 years, and we are celebrating the 10th anniversary of the green bond now. And we coined the term green bonds, and we developed the process for issuing green bonds, and since then, these processes have been adopted by different standards, international standards that are out there, regional standards, as well as country-specific standards, and they have become international best practices, so that now when issuers issue green bonds, they follow the same process that the World Bank used when they issued their first green bond. So we, both my friend from the ADB and I are talking so much about green bonds because it's considered the big thing in financing environment-friendly projects from the capital markets. So before I really explain the process, etc., I wanted to give you a little bit of an idea of what green bonds are. I'm sure that some of you know what they are already, but please bear with me, those of you who don't. Is the clicker here? Thanks. Okay, so green bonds are basically a subset of socially responsible bonds. We know that socially responsible bonds are those whose proceeds are tied to socially responsible investments. And in the case of green bonds, these are specifically tied to climate-friendly and environmentally sustainable projects. And these are just a sample of the kind of projects that can be financed with green bonds, but in general, both mitigation and adaptation projects are financed by green bonds. And if we look at the market, as I mentioned, we started in 2008 with the first green bond. And since then, the market has grown tremendously. Last year, the total amount of new green bond issuance was about 165 billion. And when we started, we saw that in the first few years, it was only the supranationals and the multilaterals which were issuing green bonds. So it was the World Bank, ADB, EIB, the African Development Bank, etc. But since then, things have changed. In 2012, the first Muni green bond was issued by Massachusetts. And after that, in 2013, our sister organization, IFC, issued its first green bond. And apparently, they were sold within a couple of hours, all the bonds. And after IFC issued its green bonds, all the corporates basically jumped in. And today, we have a very well-diversified issuer base. We are seeing financial institutions, banks, electric utilities, and even cities, municipalities, and even sovereigns now. So in the, especially in the last year or so, we saw Poland issue the first sovereign green bond, which was followed by France. And after that, we saw the emerging markets actually jump into the bandwagon. We saw Fiji, a tiny country in Asia Pacific, issue a $50 million green bond to finance specifically its adaptation projects, which was also different from what other issuers have been doing so far. And that was a World Bank project in the sense that the World Bank provided technical assistance for the project, and I was very privileged to be associated with it. And that was followed by the first African sovereign green bond by Nigeria. And since then, we've had Belgium and Lithuania, and of course, Indonesia issued the first sovereign green sukuk. But the idea of the green sukuk, actually, the concept started in Malaysia in 2017. And again, I was very privileged to be associated with that project. And basically, they introduced the concept of the green sukuk. A sukuk is an Islamic bond. So the idea was that you tap the Islamic financial markets and its complementarities with the green in order to create a new product that can be used by issuers who are interested in issuing Islamic bonds, etc. So now we have more than 500 issuers out there. Like I said, a very well diversified issuer base. The World Bank itself has issued $11 billion of green bonds, and they finance most of our environment-friendly and green projects. So in terms of how to issue a green bond, a green bond is very similar to a plain vanilla bond. And the way that you would issue a green bond is the same way that you would issue a regular bond, in the sense that you have to have a credit rating, and then you, of course, have to deal with financial regulations and the disclosures that come with it. You would work with underwriters and try to get the best price, try to understand the currency and the tenor that makes sense, etc. But in the case of the green bond, you have to go through a few additional steps. And basically, those steps are what gives investors who are really interested in environmental, social, and governance type of projects, or SRI type of investments, these requirements or these extra processes give them the comfort that the proceeds of the green bond are actually being used for environment-friendly purposes and not for any other purposes. So first of all, the issuer has to identify potential green projects, a portfolio of green projects, in order to determine the size. And they have to set up a process to show how these projects fit into the green criteria that is out there. And they have to get an external opinion to say that the process that they have put in place actually makes sense. And then after the issuance of the bond, basically they have to provide a reporting, what we call impact reporting, about how the proceeds of the bond are being used. And the reason that they have to do this is because investors who are buying these green bonds don't just care about returns. They don't just care about the yield or the profit. They care about the kind of projects that they are actually supporting. And that's why all this reporting is very, very important to maintain the integrity of the market. So what is the World Bank doing in this regard? So I actually work for a department called Financial Advisory and Banking, and we sit within the World Bank Treasury. We develop new financial products in response to client needs, and the green bond is one of them. And then we take those products to our clients and help them understand those products and implement those products in order to meet their development challenges. Specifically in the field of green bonds, what we do is we're helping emerging market governments develop their green bond markets. We are actually identifying potential issuers and helping them issue the green bonds. So we walk them through the whole process from A to Z to facilitate their issuance. And to date, this has resulted in as I mentioned, the first green sukuk in the world, which is from Malaysia. And there have been 5 Malaysian green sukuks so far. 3 of them were renewable energy and 2 green buildings. And Malaysia, one of the Malaysian corporates also issued a green bond. And then we worked with Fiji as well as Nigeria. I worked with an infrastructure financing facility in Indonesia to help them issue the first corporate green bond there. And of course, the Ministry of Finance in Indonesia to issue the first sovereign green sukuk. We are working with governments all over the world, with regulators and ministries of finance to help them develop the green bond guidelines that will catalyze more and more of these green bond issuances, which can be used to finance green investments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Farah, if you allow, also a question to you.
Sure.
I noticed on your graph that you provided with the growth, you had for 2018 the figures for the first 7 months, if I saw that correctly. And I just looked at the figures, and if I calculate correctly, if I directly extrapolate that, then you are coming to 55% of the 2017 figure. That is sizably lower after exponential growth that you had in previous years. Could you comment on that? Is there a reason? Is that a misperception because it's hugely nonlinear over the year?
It is a misperception. Actually, the expectation is that this year it will, by the end of the year, it will grow actually up to 250 billion. And that is what Moody's and Bloomberg and S&P are estimating. But why it slowed down at that point, we cannot really say. But we are expecting the market to pick up.
And do you know, if you look at the green bonds, do you have data on what they're actually used for downstream? Is there data available, or does it stop with the definitions of the green bond and then there's no follow-up data? Or I don't know, maybe Mr. Hideaki Iwasaki has data about that. I have no clue, either of you.
The data is available because, as I mentioned, all green bond issuers, though all of them don't do it, they have to produce an impact report at the end of every year until the bond matures, which basically shows the list of projects that have been financed with the green bonds. So if you look at those reports, you'll be able to see exactly what has been financed. And there are actually entities out there like the Climate Bonds Initiative and the International Capital Markets Association who actually house this kind of information. So if you go to their websites, you'll see what kind of projects are being financed.
Thank you very much. Any amendments to that information on the spot? I see full agreement between your two institutions. I'm happy to see that. So I would like to turn over, after this really fascinating information on the intrinsicies of the green bonds, which I think is very helpful for our discussion. I would like to lead over to Mrs. Yuki Yasui, who is from the UNEP Finance Initiative, a very remarkable initiative actually, where UNEP went out and provided a lot of information and guidance about financial markets, and maybe you can inform us about a number of the details. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very delighted to be here today. I'm from the UNEP Finance Initiative. It is probably one of the oldest partnership between the private sector and the United Nations. It started in 1992, the original Rio Earth Summit, where some of the banks were asking UNEP to help them understand how banks could help in sustainable development. Now today, fast forwarding, we have 230 financial institutions, banks, investment companies, and insurers who are working together with UNEP in mainstreaming environmental and social issues within their institutions. So first, I'd like to start my intervention regarding the level of ambition that we have for green financing. So we've been talking about how green bonds has been really picking up in the last 5 years, 10 years, and that it has made a big impact in green financing. But if you look at the whole picture of the financial market, green bonds still only represent 1% of a $100 trillion bonds market. So we're talking about a $1 trillion green bonds, which sounds fabulous, but at the same time, the whole green bonds, the bonds market is $100 trillion. And if you look at the investment in renewable energies, it is renewable energy last year was 287.5 billion, whilst fossil fuel investment was $825 billion. So you can see that we are still financing a very brown economy. And the truth of the matter is that finance and the economy are intrinsically linked. They are the same, they are the different sides of the coin. So the finance is fueling the brown economy, but the brown economy is fueling the finance. And so we really need to get out of this niche market, which is still where we are on green financing, and to make a shift, a transitional shift, where finance is fit for purpose for sustainable development, and that the future of finance is sustainable finance. So to explain what the financial regulators have been doing on this front, UNEP has been leading the work on the design of a green financial system, and since 2014 have touched upon a lot of financial regulators in persuading them that the future of finance is sustainable finance. So there are two broad streams or two motivations for financial regulators to work on green finance. One is more on the prudential side. So a lot of the developed country financial regulators are worried that climate change, if it takes a bumpy transition from a if the Paris Agreement is actually to be implemented, they are worried that the economy will go through a bumpy transition, and that would cause a lot of panic in the investment market around fossil fuel investments, and you might have heard of things like stranded assets and carbon bubble. So there is this underlying worry amongst financial regulators of both the physical impact of climate change, but also the transition risk, where the market cannot smoothly move from a high carbon to a low carbon economy. So that's one strand, and the Bank of England, for example, has been a leader in this area, whilst the other area of financial regulation leadership on green finance is on more of the opportunity side. And China and the People's Bank of China has been one of the leading regulators in this field, where they had issued the green credit guidelines in 2012 and have been ramping up on getting financial institutions in China to lend much more towards green projects and green industries. Now, so we have the financial regulators starting to align, and today it's actually quite hard not to see any country regulators that don't have anything on sustainable finance. For example, even in the US, at the state level, the US, Washington, and California insurance commissioners are involved and are leading on discussions on how insurance regulation could support insurers to support sustainable development. On the finance industry side, we have been working, UNEP Finance Initiative has been leading on developing frameworks on sustainability and the finance sector. So in 2006, we launched the Principles for Responsible Investment, the PRI, which today has a $40 trillion assets under management, and they are now a separate entity out of UNEP. And then in 2012, we issued the Principles for Sustainable Insurance, which today counts for 20% of the issuance of policies, insurance policies today. And this year in November, we are launching the Principles for Responsible Banking as a draft principles, and then a full launch next year in September 2019. So the frameworks are there, and many banks, many financial institutions are starting to understand and look at the risks and opportunities of green financing. But there is indeed quite a big gap between coming out from a niche thing to a mainstreaming of environmental and social issues within their business and their strategy. And one of the things that I would put forward as an idea for UNIDO and those that are working in technology is that I think financial institutions today are starting to understand the idea of foresight, to look ahead and see the Sustainable Development Goals, to see Paris Agreement, and the need to work themselves towards it. And I think it's the technology that you are able to provide. The best conversation that you can have with a financier is to show that your technology, or the technology that you want to deploy, is aligned to that feature, and that if you work backwards, this is the technology that you should be investing in or lending in. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think one of the many things to be learned from your presentation is certainly that it is insufficient if opportunities are only there, because you mentioned opportunities, but you also mentioned the necessity of different stakeholders understanding the opportunities and how to actually price them. Do you have specific experience or examples maybe where some of the stakeholders you're interacting with, banks, maybe larger banks, try to move into understanding the opportunities in the market, ideally outside renewable energies, but if had to be also within your renewable energies? If you have an example, I don't know.
So one interesting one that we're actually going to experiment, so we haven't really tested it yet, is we are trying to use market forces and consumer preferences that compensate for the lack of regulation at the national level. So we are trying to encourage the take-up of green mortgages in Sri Lanka, where the new building certificate is going to include a non-use of toxic building materials. Basically, in Sri Lanka at the moment, the regulation is still quite lax on the matter, but the green building certificate will ask buildings to remove toxic materials from green buildings. And we are going to market that green building certificate as to the middle classes in Sri Lanka, the growing middle classes in Sri Lanka, who are looking for safer homes, for more healthy homes. So whilst green buildings have been traditionally all about energy efficiency, we are using a more health and safety angle to boost the green mortgage sector and the green building sector in Sri Lanka.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, we will come to our last guest, which I would like to introduce. Mr. Pondet Anandchai is the founder and CEO of Cryptovation X, and he will discuss with us, I assume, concepts around blockchain, I would guess, and how it can help with green finance. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I actually look young, right? Because I'm young. So I thank you very much for the organizer that include the gender equality and also like youth engagement in this panel. And I am pretty sure that this approach is very important for the United Nations. It's also another industry. But I initially started my career in United Nations environment programs here, the next building. But then I realized that a lot of projects, a lot of good initiatives cannot really implement because we don't have enough money, right? UNDP have lots of more money than us, right? And then I left UN and then work a little bit with the Asian Development Bank, who have more money, but still not enough. And then I joined the startup world, tech entrepreneur, and then blockchain. So today I'm so glad that I have opportunity to come back to the UN where I start my career and then share how the blockchain technology can really help to heal the world, right? So may I borrow the pardon? Thank you. So I will share in two parts. The first part is the blockchain for infrastructure for the green industry projects, and another part is direct to the theme of this session, which is financing. But I would like to add for this. This project is called Power Ledger. It's Australian bond project, but it's first commercialized in US. Right? US is quite strict, but they allow this Australian foreign company to implement this project, which is a good sign. The Power Ledger help those renewable energy people to sell their electricity on the blockchain. And there's another project that very similar to Power Ledger called Electrify.Asia. This one is from Singapore. And this one also try to implement the project in the Southeast Asia and also the whole Asia. But the Power Ledger is more like in the west side. But also in Thailand, Power Ledger also work with the PTT. PTT is the biggest and also like state-owned petroleum company who want to try to explore not a business model for the clean energy and renewable energy. So the question here is why the internet cannot do this, right? Because we have internet for a long time and we realize that it's very amazing tools that can revolutionize our civilizations. The problem is power is quite sensitive. We may remember about the hacker, like I think last year, someone claimed from some country that is very cold. I am afraid that I will mention the name of the country. But what happened is that the hacker from that country hacked the power system of the Ukraine and make the Ukraine shut down for half of the country for like a couple of days. That is very dangerous. So if we put the energy or power on the internet grid, right, and managed by the internet, which is very old technology and very vulnerable for the hacker, that is something that people don't want to do anymore because we witness when the hacker can really go to those nuclear power plant or solar cells or the generator and then shut it down. But sharing or connecting this power source through the blockchain is much more secure. I am pretty sure that the audience in this room may have heard about the word blockchain because it's been a buzzword for a year already, so I'm not going to touch. But the short description of blockchain is the Web 2.0, so the more secure, more transparent, more efficient website or internet, not website, sorry, the internet, right? That's why this kind of initiative is very interesting because we can not only connect this power source securely, but we can trade it very transparency and also more efficient than having the middleman. So this is very good projects that you can go check on, Power Ledger and Electrified Asia. Now go direct to the theme of this panel, which is financing the green industry. In blockchain, there is the one innovation called smart contract. Smart contract is this one. I take a picture from the Ethereum.org. So you may have heard Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin is like the store of value, try to become the currency, try to liberate people from the central bank or whatsoever. But what's sexy is not Bitcoin, right? The real fascinating part is the blockchain, which is the technology behind Bitcoin. And blockchain can do much more things, not just only being the currency or the store of value. So Ethereum is the second largest blockchain project in the world, not trying to be the currency, but try to be the internet, the next internet, want to move the whole website or the application to be on blockchain. So one of the very first successful application of Ethereum blockchain is called smart contract. So this picture illustrates that we all understand about crowdfunding, right? Crowdfunding is the way we source the money from lots of people, not only institutional like the green bond, but maybe from like the retail investor like us to do something, right? It can be for donation base to build this temple, or it can be for this business, that business. But the crowdfunding industry cannot really go so fast because of the issue of the trust. In US and in UK have the website called Crowdcube, where the projects or the business can post a project and sell the equities to, through the people. And in US have the website called EquityNet, right? This is the equity-based crowdfunding, meaning that if you invest, we give the equity back. But maybe there's more crowdfunding platform that more popular like Kickstarter or Indiegogo. That is reward-based crowdfunding, which is you put money in and you get the products or goods. But some projects, you cannot really give back the product. For example, if I build a solar farm and then I want to raise funds from crowdfunding, how can I give the solar panel back, right? But I can maybe share the profit of the solar farm that I sell the electricity back to the investor or the backer. That's why we need something like equity crowdfunding. But blockchain changed the whole landscape of the crowdfunding industry. Through the blockchain, there's something called ICO, Initial Coin Offering. This slides from Security and Exchange Commission of Thailand, because Thailand just regulated. ICO stands for Initial Coin Offering. The name is like, because they have IPO in the stock market, right? So initial public offering, so initial coin offering. So ICO is crowdfunding plus blockchain technology plus being a crypto asset or cryptocurrency. This ICO movement already surpassed the number of the fund that raised by VC or the venture capital last year for the tech entrepreneur. So I see that this is the future for the green industry, that they can raise funds, and more and more government regulate it already. For example, like Thailand. So Thai regulations allow that if someone want to build a solar farm and want to do crowdfunding, they can crowdfunding through the ICO. This is better than, why is better than just equity crowdfunding? Because equity crowdfunding, mostly they restrict the jurisdiction, like, okay, the people from this country can just invest in these projects or whatsoever, right? But since this is on blockchain, it's international. So the people around the world can invest the solar farm in, let's say, Indonesia. And then there is an immediate secondary market that they can trade this stake or this coin. Unlike the equity crowdfunding, that if you have the share of this company, you have to wait for this company to go IPO, to go to the stock market, and you can trade or you can exit from the investment. But ICO you can do. But there's a downside about this, like speculative, price pump and dump. But more and more that regulator try to educate, like the Thai regulator, Japanese regulator, and Korean, Singapore, US, more and more that the government and regulator try to introduce this and regulate it. That is a good sign. And not only green industry, but all industry that can participate in these tools as a tool for raise fund. So I hope that the green industry projects can really kick off through blockchain-based crowdfundings called ICO or SCO in the future. And if we have more and more green industry projects, then in the end of the day, we can really heal the world and make it a better place for you and for me and the entire human race. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pondit, for that very interesting presentation. And I would like to, before asking you also a follow-up question, I would like to come back to the audience and advise you again about the questions that are up there for your considerations. And not only the questions by the audience, I will go to them in a second, but also the questions that, the multiple choice questions of what you consider important barriers for seeking investment and what kind of financing would be most effective to support, since we might have the benefit that these might guide our further discussions. But before going there, let me first remark on the blockchain that for those of you who are maybe on the more conservative side and have not actually utilized blockchain, I can assure you that the UN is a conservative organization, that UNIDO is a conservative organization. And we in UNIDO, that means Environment and Finance departments, are discussing already now to do reporting on project impacts with blockchain technology and to provide the support we are providing to companies through blockchain, or rather linked to blockchain technology, in order to simplify the reporting back and possibly even going into accounting. So if the UN can do it, I can assure you that a lot of private entities should be able to do it too. Now, having started with that, there is, of course, do you see a barrier for your ICO approach, a barrier of magnitude before that becomes efficient, meaning what is the magnitude of investment that you would consider feasible? There are, of course, a number of input variables that you have. You have to make visible the financial situation of the company, of the concept of some other things, which is costly, but there might be also add-ons. What is the level of investment where you would think that ICO would be an option for a company to go forward with?
So that's mean, what is the condition that the...
How big does the investment have to be so that ICO would be an interesting concept to utilize? Can you do it for 50,000 or does it have to be 20 million?
The average amount of ICO projects in 2018, this year, is around 25 million US dollars per project, which is not small, I think. But the largest ICO projects can be billion, but it depends on the project. But I foresee that for the green business or the green industry, for example, we raise funds to build a solar farm. The size of the number of the fund is not really hard to calculate because we can really tell that what is going to be used for. But a lot of the ICO projects is software infrastructure projects. So they just have the paper and then white paper, right? And they say, okay, they want to raise this amount of money to do this thing, but it's really hard to calculate. They may say, okay, we want this amount of money because we want to headhunt the top-notch software engineers, something like that, but it's so hard. But I see that for the green industry projects, it's much easier to come up with that number. Yeah, but the cost to do ICO is around 500K to 1 million USD. So for those one who may want to do ICO around the world, I mean, the global level should consider that 1 million US dollar cost. So maybe if it starts from 10 million US dollars, that cover the cost. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And I would, before coming to the interesting, actually I see we start going into the representative range of replies, I believe. We have above 20, so that should consolidate the replies to the question, what do you consider the most important barrier for seeking investment into the green industry? And interestingly enough, lack of market and or regulatory pressure, meaning lack of the need to actually change something, is perceived the clear winner, or is it loser, of the barriers, closely followed by the efforts to obtain the loans. And that is for me very interesting. The lack of market and or regulatory pressure is of course something that one can work on relatively easily with tools that are available to multilateral organizations, to national governments. Now the efforts to obtain loans and investments is maybe a little bit different story. That these are things which are within the financial systems often, and in the interaction between financial system and those seeking either investment or a loan. So how would you, and actually we just heard the number for the ICO, which I found very informative, in actual cost of preparation, $500,000, $1 million. That gives a good feeling that investments below $1 million are evidently not interesting because of transaction cost. So I would maybe start with our colleagues from both the Asian Development Banks as well as the World Bank, if they are aware of initiatives they are possibly supporting to reach out to entities which have smaller projects or to finance moderate improvements which are worthwhile but are way below the current threshold of what would be financially achievable.
Shall I first? Actually, the last slide of my presentation, the Green Finance Catalyzing Facility, is basically partially to address this issue. And if we are just individually looking at projects, basically we are a cottage industry, actually, as a finance industry. And we need to standardize the procedures, and we need to get the size for this kind of facility to make sense. So probably our attempt to sell these concepts would be firstly with bigger countries like China or Indonesia, where there can be volume. So this is bundling, basically bundling, and creating a facility to finance a pipeline of projects, and we provide facility to prepare those projects. This is one way. But yeah, in a market where this volume cannot be achieved, yeah, I don't really have an immediate answer.
If you could solve all problems already now, then we would be all out of work. So that is absolutely fine. Fatah, please.
So, I totally agree with you. We are also looking at opportunities to bundle, for instance, loans, small-size loans for SMEs, for instance, or small IPP projects, etc. I mean, this is definitely a challenge that many of our clients have come to us with. And we are also looking at the potential of basically aggregating these loans in creating perhaps green funds or green investment funds, or warehouse financing, aggregating these into a portfolio and securitizing them, etc. So there are opportunities there. There are also issues in terms of standardization of contracts, as well as uncertainties related to cash flows. But slowly but surely, I believe that banks are getting used to the idea. We're definitely working with them to see how we can push this forward.
Is there exactly anything that can be done top-down, essentially?
So the EU is currently looking at their sustainable financial roadmap, and two things that are very interesting. One is the taxonomy of green financing. They are trying to standardize green financing, which will make standardization and bundling easier. The other interesting thing, which is still very experimental, is the debate about whether to get brown economies to be doing the explanation as well. So they feel that it's very unfair that green bonds have to do all the explanation and that normal vanilla bonds don't have to do anything. And so whether all bonds should start to report about their proceeds and their impacts, and that would create a level playing field.
A very interesting thought, actually. I would come back to Divuhu. If you look back at your experiences with, on average, I would assume substantially smaller investment, I understand that a certain share of that was government-backed or supported, which is kind of changing the perspectives, evidently, of the financial institutions. Do you have also experiences where banks were basically alone or almost alone in providing loans to companies that you were dealing with, or is that relatively black hole? All of the things were also government supported or mainly government supported. How do you see the situation bottom up?
With bankable projects and brownfield projects, banks came up and they took their position and they funded projects easily. The ones where they cannot fund, it's when we still have not defined or developed a bankable proposal. And the other challenge, like they're all saying, is that a lot of the projects out of RESIPNet activities are fairly very small. So you're finding they're not even $1 million sizable projects. So the banks, when they do risk calculation, those projects already falls outside the risk scale, so to say. So it became difficult for them to finance. So what government came in to do was to put collateral on a number of those small projects. Combined gives you a minimum. IFC was saying if they are $50 million US, they would consider that. So you would group them together to a value of 50 million, and government puts in a grant to support that, then it becomes attractive to a bank.
What magnitude of collateral was put up by the government for 15 million, let's say?
It varies. It depends on the value of the project, on, for example, carbon market issues, or the recommended by Jeff, the Global Environmental Fund, would say if you put in 25%, we will put in a 25% as well. But an average, you were looking at government putting 30% of the cost of the project. But it was still, even if it's government, an issue of what is the return on investment, what the risks involves, because you also don't want to be restless with the lending or with the provision of funding.
Thank you. I come to one of the questions from the audience that we got, and it's actually to our two development bank speakers. And it is a very polite question, a very good question, as in it asks to share a success story of green bonds, but also a story where green bonds fail. A carrot and a stick, so to say, because failures are always difficult to talk about, but typically those where one can learn massively more. So if you would be in a position to share stories about both, that would be great. I feel bad if I would give one of you the opportunity to have a win and the other one a loss. So maybe we have 4 stories briefly.
Actually, probably I can talk about one success story of a private company, a project company issuing green bonds for a geothermal project in the Philippines, and we facilitated in certifying the project, and also we provided the loan actually outside with the bond issuance just to support the process. So this was the first Philippine peso denominated green bond issuance. It was in 2016. Yeah. So this is one success story. Unfortunately, actually, I don't. I can't really talk about the failure. Actually, if the initiatives did not materialize, they may be failures, but I don't have the immediate information on those.
That is fine, and actually about failures, it can be also generalized. What's important about them is, of course, to learn, to see what we can learn, right? What to avoid.
Yeah, but actually, probably it's not really about the specific case, but generally speaking, even in our normal operations, transaction cost involved in complying with our policies, and also in the case of private sector operations, disclosure of companies' information to a third party entity like ADB, this could be a deal breaker. Okay. So I'm sure, in many of our efforts to go for green bond issuance, there were, those deal breakers involved in it.
Thank you very much. Please, Farah, if you can, if you have coincidentally one or the other, or ideally both.
In terms of success stories, I would say that at this point, because the supply is so small compared to the demand, because we have investors who have $25 trillion of assets looking for green bonds, and there aren't enough issuances in green bonds. So given that most of the green bonds that are issued that we see are oversubscribed 2 times, 3 times, up to 6 times. And from that point of view, definitely all the transactions that I've been involved with have been very, very successful. Whether it's the Indonesia Green Sukuk, the Malaysian Green Sukuk. Specifically with the Malaysian Green Sukuk, what happened was that institutional investors who were not buying ESG or SRI-focused assets suddenly became interested in this type of assets. They realized the value of these assets, and then subsequently they created allocations out of their portfolios to buy these assets. So all these are really good success stories. If you think about the issuance from Fiji, what we saw was that from the very beginning, the government of Fiji wanted to ensure that domestic investors had the first, basically, uptake of the bond. But there was an overwhelming amount of interest from foreign investors for the Fiji bonds. And we've seen that basically, all over the place. In terms of failures, I can't say that I have seen any failures. What I have seen is some concern. Concern in the sense that now that green bonds has become the darling of the capital markets, so to speak, we see some issuers who may not be fully committed to the transition to a low carbon sort of economy, wanting to also take advantage of this whole momentum, of this whole trend, and the branding opportunity and issuing green bonds. So that is something concerning, although, as long as they can prove that, they are committed to sustainability to some extent, they're willing to transition, and they have a strategy, I'm okay with that, with even an oil company issuing a green bond.
Thank you very much. I see also nodding over there with Yuki. I would like to come now and actually use the second question that we asked to the audience, which was what kind of financing would be most effective to support green industry. I would like to use that a little bit to guide us, or the responses, which will sure in a moment come up on the screen, to guide us into thinking and discussing a little bit about whether what we heard today has already provided us an answer to the question, how do we actually get funding into green industry? And before the podium, we have discussed among the group here a little bit about what we perceive as the challenges for green industry, and admittedly a little bit driven by your moderator. The outcome of that was that if we take renewables with a very clear investment out of the picture, and if we look at efficiencies which are typically based on savings on one operation because they adhere to specifics of one operation, then we are likely to have investment sizes which are low, a couple of million at best, going down to lower 6-digit figures, 100,000, 200,000. The question is, did we answer today in the combination already sufficiently the question, how can we make finance available? Or is there still a sizable gap that we need to address more? And I don't know if I can have the answer to the questions and answers to question 2. What kind of financing would be most effective to support green industry? from the Slido poll, yeah, very good. And clear first place is special loan package would be most effective to support green industry. That means essentially one way or the other a subsidized loan, followed by governmental subsidy or tax relief, and impact investor, followed by a standard loan. Normal investor, fascinatingly enough, massively lower, and we have 41 respondents. That means that is already a qualified response. It's not statistically off for the audience perception of the situation. For me, the two interesting points are that actually the special loan package, meaning a somewhat subsidized loan package, rates higher than direct funding from the government, which is theoretically, in terms of cost to the government, probably not far off. So that is one point maybe to look at. And the second one, the amazingly high percentage for impact investor versus normal investor. And maybe we could briefly discuss also whether impact investors are maybe something that even in case of moderately sized investments, maybe not the lower end, but moderately sized investment would be an option. So anyone volunteer to have an opinion on these bandwidths of topic in my panel? I see thinking. Maybe I'm otherwise brutal, and I simply ask Yuki, maybe with her overarching work that she is doing, for her first comments on this.
On the special loan packages, I think the design of such a package is really important to make sure that it is revolving funds and that it's sustainable, because we've seen a lot of green credit lines from governments or from different sources that once it runs out, the whole project does not continue. So we need to make sure to see whether the technology or the learning is obtained through that duration of that special package, and whether it actually can remain sustainable thereafter, or that there is a revolving element to it where the income is generated back into this package and that it can sustain itself. So I think the design of a special loan would be really important. In terms of impact investors, I think it is still too niche, and that while it is a very good place to start, we need the whole society's expectation and the finance industry's expectations to be talking about impact. And at the end of the day, the lack of financing for green industries is the lack of business models. And so we need to really reconfigure our economic system to say, how can we reward good impact? How can we penalize bad impact? You know, we should really go down back to like the basics of our economy and look at why do we pay taxes? Is it just because you are making profit, or is it because you are making a bad profit that you should pay more tax? You know, so sometimes I feel that impact investment, while they are the angels in the center, everyone should become impact investors.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, the idea is that everyone will become an impact investor, but there are only so many impact investors out there. Everybody else, the major majority, are these normal investors who are interested in normal returns. And until we can have a kind of behavior change, maybe through engagement, with investor engagement, by better educating boards and executives who exert sort of pressure on, say, asset owners, it may be difficult to turn these normal investors into impact investors. If we do want to tap these impact investors, then we have to make sure that our projects are bankable. And these are projects that any investor will want to invest in.
Yeah, I also agree. Our practical experience was that in the beginning, the South African government, through the Development Bank of Southern Africa, made available, I think it was about 22 billion rands for special loan package purposes. And unfortunately, they have not done most of the projects are now in their mid-implementation, so we have not had a reliable monitoring and measurement to see the impact of that. And once the fund was depleted at the bank, everything stopped. No more investment, no more interest. And now they went to a point where point number 2 of subsidies and tax relief and combine it with special loan. But what it has done is that now government has officially launched a national carbon tax and a plastic levy. So you now have tax regimes coming up everywhere to try and counter the loss of and the subsidy. So you're creating another social gap in terms of increasing the cost of living for the sake of creating a financial breakthrough. So I would like that if you were to get involved in this, you combine special loans with government subsidies, tax incentive, and probably use impact investor to guide you, because they're the ones with the experience and the knowledge on how to maximize the value of a project or of investment, so that you drive that within the current infrastructure of investment economy and not create a parallel process to avoid collapsing the system.
It's not really an answer, but just looking at these answers, and ADB traditionally was basically providing special loan packages to our clients, and also trying to influence government policies on the subsidy or tax regimes. But probably we are also expected to act like impact investors to bring in positive changes. And that's something I just thought about by looking at these answers.
Thank you very much. And this was almost a round of final comments, except you, Pondit, would like to have possibility for a final word, because I don't want to cut you off. We just had the whole panel again having their option. But you don't have to. I mean, don't feel obliged.
I would just add that maybe another choice, ICO. Yeah. In the future.
Do you think that the cost that you mentioned, 500,000 to $1 million, through effects such as standardization of approach or similar effects, could be pushed down substantially? Or do you think it will be more or less plus minus 20% or so, more or less a given that it stays in that magnitude?
I'm pretty sure it's going to be cheaper and more affordable. And because most of the money is put in marketing and educating investor, and since it's regulated, right, just like the earlier era of the stock exchange, those financial advisory company, they charge a lot to bring the company to the stock market, but now it's more competitive and then cheaper and cheaper. Actually, ICO, the word behind is crowdfunding. So the word here is we don't have is crowdfunding, which I know is not the mainstream yet. But the whole world, the whole civilization is moved forward something called decentralizations, right? We have decentralization wastewater management. We have decentralization of the political power. I'm pretty sure that for finance, we're gonna go forward the decentralization approach as well.
So, thank you very much. I would now actually like to thank very heartfelt the members of this panel who undertook considerable efforts to spend these 1.5 hours with us. I really must say I very highly appreciate for you coming here, flying in possibly only for this session, and taking the time to discuss with us what I think is a very crucial point, where we have aggregated tremendous global environmental benefits through efficiency improvements, but we are not quite sure how we can go about it in a disaggregated way. And I hope that this is only the beginning of a longer discussion we can all have together. I thank very much the audience for participating in this session, and again, thank you so much for our excellent speakers and participants on the panel. Thank you very much, and I see you all again in half an hour for the closing session. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you to the panel. And just to remind again that the draft Bangkok statement is available outside and on that link showed earlier. So please have a look at that, as we will be discussing that in the last session, which will start at 4 o'clock.
There was thing left on the first chair.
Yeah, on the first. So it's either moderator or the first speaker, right? Where? ยังขอน้ำปั่นเขาเป็นคนไทยเหรอเขาเป็นคนไทยโอ้โหถามอย่างนั้นเหรอเจ๊คนคอนเดตไม่ได้เป็นลูกสาวแม่เขาบอกว่ายินดีมากๆที่ได้กลับมาบ้านลูกสาวแม่ลูกสาวแม่เฮ้ย
Yeah, but are they? I don't see them doing it yet. Sorry.
Excellent. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, right. No, it's across the. In fact, I have to sign a statement every time I contract, where I say, you know, how much time, if any, have I spent. That's a bit yeah. But I mean, so 20,000 in my case, because then they thanks. Yeah. What they do is they calculate my fee based essentially on what my salary is. So doing it that way means that essentially I can only do 2 months of work a year. It's enough. But they can right. But then yeah, exactly. Yeah, you have to just sort of that's true. I mean, I think it's 6 months rule. Actually, you need 1 year rule to make because it really does to really just stop thinking and do other things. Right. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. How many years do you start? Counting the days? Is that really taking up a lot of time?
Hopefully not.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
You know, we have these horrible things in Lido, where we have these screens, we have a similar arrangement, similarly conservative. And then you sit here, and then you have to press a button, and then the screens come out up to here. And no one can see it anymore. That's much better. But actually, what I normally do is, as you can see from here, that's good enough for me. This is, I would say, this is pretty neat. I always had the feeling networking break. Yeah, that's over. Good, done. How do you feel? need something from my... Don't even think about it.
Yeah. So, welcome all to the final session. The gavel is already rolling. So, welcome back to the final session. Just to repeat, perhaps, if you didn't take the draft Bangkok statement, it was available outside. So I'm pleased to introduce for the final closing. We have Stefan Sikars, Director in the Department of Environment, UNIDO, Mia Mikic, Director, Trade, Investment and Innovation Division of ESCAP. And we have also with us a conference rapporteur, your new face here on the podium, Mr. Edward Clarence Smith, Senior Consultant, Green Industry, Environment Management and CSR for UNIDO. So I'll hand it over to them for the final session.
Thank you very much, and welcome now to the closing session of this 5th Green Industry Conference in October of this year in Bangkok. Firstly, I would like to thank all of you for participating and actually staying with us up to the closing session. We have had a very fascinating conference with very interesting not only participation but also contributions from speakers but also from the audience. The interactive system that we employed allowed to have the most relevant questions coming forward and being addressed by the panels, and we have covered such a wide array of topics here, where we tried to capture not only a technical side of green industry, but also fundamental barriers and fundamental concerns about how to employ green industry principles on a wider scale. And I think another thing which has emerged here very strongly is that most of the discussions I have witnessed were at some point in time talking also about circular economy, not only the circular economy panel, which was actually there as well, but also a lot of the other discussions were veering off into circular economy, demonstrating how critical green industry is actually to make the economy more and more circular, and how much this topic is relevant for all of us. So we have discussed these different points, and we will hear in a moment actually a report from my colleague Ned Clarence Smith, who will advise us on what happened. And after that you have received, there were copies of the draft of the Bangkok statement outside, which I hope we can afterwards simply endorse by acclamation. I hope you use the time of the last 2 hours in the meantime to have a look at it. I know some of you definitely did, because I was pointed out that in the second line of the text it said this conference took place from 3rd to 5th of September, but of course it's October. So thank you for that. Good proof that this has actually reached you and that you had a time to reflect on it. We come to that after the report, but before going there, I would like to hand over to my colleague Mia, and I would like to do that with a very heartfelt thank you for the great cooperation with ESCAP. We had started to discuss this green industry conference here together, and we have traveled a far way to come to, I think, from my side, a really wonderful product, thanks to your efforts and your hospitality in this beautiful building here. So I don't want to start with all of the thanks, but these were words which had to be said, so floor is yours. Mia.
Thank you, Stefan, very much, and I'm humbled by all your thanks. I think it's to be shared across our two organizations, because we have really partnered very well, and as well as with participants and all the speakers. And thank you very much for giving me the floor, because before we close and before we part to enjoy Bangkok in a, what was numerous times said, in a sustainable way, I will just want to share a few points related to the event that we have spent last two days in. So I think we definitely focused on discussing on adopting circular economy approaches as very important for ensuring continued greening of business. The greening of products and services could significantly reduce emissions and improve management of waste and wastewater. However, as many noted, a circular economy is about more than reuse and recycling. It is also about designing products and services to minimize resource use and maximize the possibilities for reuse. That is about integrating a circular thinking about materials and energy use into the whole product life cycle. I think we have had very constructive discussions with different stakeholders on that, and I hope that continued knowledge sharing on what we have achieved here will inspire lots of other activities in not only NGO and business sector, but also government in their approaches on this. We have also had very good discussions on the role of business, and we do all understand that businesses have a critical role to play in what we are to achieve through the Sustainable Development Goals. There are many ways, of course, through which business can do that. I think we have discussed a number of them in a very comprehensive manner, and that we have learned from businesses themselves on how we can do that by scaling up their practices and following their very good behavior. I think what we have also, I hope that we have shared with participants is what ESCAP can do for Asia-Pacific countries, not only from our concrete reduction in or elimination of one-use plastic that we follow here, but also more importantly in working with the governments in terms of going towards producing green economy results in all levels that are necessary in this region that is very diverse. We have countries that are achieving excellent results on all the levels with respect to greening, but we also have those that are very much behind and that need to be pulled up by showing how or helping with resources and financing on that. ESCAP very closely works with business community through the ESCAP Sustainable Business Network, and we are very proud that we do have this initiative for over a number of years, and that we learn from them in terms of many different areas, not the least sustainable business in terms of greening, but also in other areas. So I hope you have enjoyed your stay in ESCAP. We absolutely delighted that we have had opportunity to work with UNIDO on this important conference. I think this is only the beginning of our collaboration in working with countries, in particular in this region, but of course we would be delighted to also go to other regions to share the experiences from countries here and other stakeholders located in Asia Pacific. And I think I would also like to thank UNIDO staff and from the DG to everyone that has worked concretely with us to be very collegial in this collaboration and helping us to produce this result. I hope we will have opportunity to thank some people concretely in the end, so I'm not going to dwell on that, and we'll then proceed with the summary. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Let me just make a few opening comments before I go through this. I hope that this will all give you a chance, because of the way that this conference was structured, where we had parallel sessions, to try and get an understanding of what all of the sessions were about, since, of course, in the parallels you would only have been able to sit in on one. This has been fed to me from a series of sub-rapporteurs, I can say, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank them for the work that they did. So with that, let me just jump right in. And I want to start at the very beginning of this conference. I want to start with the keynote address, which had some very interesting points there. There was the point that there's growing evidence highlighting the increasing demand for resources globally, but also regionally and locally, the associated environmental impacts of extraction, use and disposal, and the resultant depletion of resources. The current manufacturing systems are highly linear. Shifting to circular economy provides clear socioeconomic opportunities, including opportunities for greening existing industries, creating new business opportunities, and creating entirely new business models. A circular economy is not about waste management. It is not a synonym for recycling. It is about suitable materials management and about keeping resources in flow for as long as possible at their maximum value. Current resource-efficient and cleaner production tools, such as in-plant assessments and industrial symbiosis, provide opportunities for industries to keep resources in flow, design out waste, and achieve material cost savings, thereby improving their efficiency and their competitiveness. The paradigm shift to waste as resources called for by the circular economy creates opportunities for new businesses in remanufacturing, refurbishment, repair, reuse, recycling, and in the sharing economy of resource sharing, product as service, and access over ownership. The circular economy as a concept filters through all of the SDGs, but hinges strongly around SDG 12, sustainable consumption and production, SDG 9, inclusive and sustainable industrialization, and SDG 11, sustainable cities and communities. Recently published national circular economy strategies show that one no longer has to choose between economic development and environmental conservation, that implementing a circular economy has greater socio-economic benefits than current development trajectories. In the high-level plenary, which was focusing on regional perspectives on green industry policy, the discussion demonstrated a number of commonalities between the countries represented in the session. Many of them had integrated the overarching objectives of the SDGs into their national strategies and policies. All were seeking to integrate economic, environmental, and social considerations into their national strategies and industrial policies. All were seeking to encourage green investment and transfer of green technology and skills. A number of countries had provided incentives in their policy instruments to catalyze the uptake of renewable energy, as well as resource efficiency and cleaner production in their industries. A common comment was a need for diversity in their industries and a need for sustainable energy sources to power their green industry ambitions to develop their economies sustainably. Then going on to the plenary that was discussing resource management and circular economy. The commonly agreed core outcomes of a circular economy were considered to be generation of increased wealth, reduction of resource dependency, minimization of waste, and reduction of the environmental footprint. Again, the point was made that a circular economy is not just about recycling. Indeed, a circular economy offers a new model of economic growth, or even an empowerment agenda, all countries being equally affected by resource depletion.
From this perspective, the larger potential in a circular economy probably lies in the use phase of products rather than in their recycling phase. Policies promoting circular economy cannot be developed in isolation. They have to be integrated into many other policies, and thus integrated and transformational policies are required to accelerate the transition to circular economies. Rules and regulatory frameworks are critical to drive the circular economy agenda, but these alone are not enough. Economic incentives, both positive and negative, are also needed. Consumers also need to be empowered to make circular economy decisions through, for instance, better eco-labels and product footprints. No one approach fits all. A mix of different approaches, regulation, incentives, etc., is needed per country, but also per sector in an economy. A collaborative approach among all involved stakeholder groups, government, cities, private sector, civil society, is key to driving towards a circular economy. So it is important to engage all stakeholders using the most relevant tools and approaches to do this. The development of a circular economy will be a major driver for the creation of new jobs, a point that was made several times in several sessions. The adoption of circular economy by major consuming economies could have knock-on effects for developing economies. Delivery into a circular economy market could change requirements on product standards, their market value, the volumes exported. However, developing economies can also take advantage of emerging economic opportunities created by moves to circular economies. And now we pass into the first series of parallel sessions, and here I will start with greening businesses and supply chains. There was a general agreement in that session on the urgent need to reduce resource inputs of SMEs and increase the efficiency of their production processes while maintaining their competitiveness, an extremely important point. 4 key factors for greening businesses and supply chains are building awareness, developing capacities, transferring technologies, and ensuring easy access to financing. The evidence is there. Quantitative results were presented on the economic, environmental, and social benefits that enterprises can enjoy by implementing resource efficiency and cleaner production measures. Greening value chains and logistics which involve SMEs is significant for jobs generation. There is great potential to increase job opportunities by having SMEs develop green services and green products. Multinationals, we must remember, can play a significant role in strengthening value chains and generating green jobs by developing the capacity of SMEs to not only comply with standards, but also to enjoy the economic, social, and environmental benefits of going green. Financing plays a crucial role in the greening of SMEs, providing easy access to credit and creating green credit lines and other green financial mechanisms are important in moving SMEs towards more sustainable patterns of production. In the parallel session on waste management, there was general agreement on the following. Prevention is essential. We need a paradigm shift to see waste as a valuable resource. Particular waste streams, such as plastics and e-waste, are of concern given their quantity and hazardous nature. Partnerships and cooperation are essential between governments, industry, academia, NGOs, and international organizations. Action is required at all levels, local, regional, national, and of course, global. Awareness raising and education are key. Other factors that were drawn attention to are as follows. Human health is important, not just the environment. Developing countries and economies in transition need better waste management infrastructure throughout each country. The Slido poll results showed participants believed that the best policy support for developing recycling industries was consumer-collected fees. The German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, BMZ, is working on a waste management and circular economy alliance. It will focus on plastics and e-waste, bringing together businesses, academia, and civil society to implement projects in developing countries and economies in transition. And then there was the parallel session on eco-industrial parks for green industry. The eco-industrial park concept has great potential in both developed as well as in developing countries. A significant number of EIPs are in fact being developed worldwide. That being said, the challenges, barriers, and assets of EIPs in developing countries are different from those in the developed countries. The World Bank, GIZ, and UNIDO have developed an EIP framework. It provides an international standard or benchmark on what makes an industrial park an EIP. It can be adapted to specific regional or national contexts, An EIP practitioner's handbook has also been published to assist with the national implementation of the framework, and UNIDO has developed a tool to help in applying this framework. The main objectives of EIPs must be to ensure a better competitiveness of industrial parks while rendering them socially and environmentally responsible. Key elements of success: governments have to be very supportive throughout the process. Communication between the different stakeholders must be fostered so that they all understand the interests and benefits of EIPs and to ensure trust between the different stakeholders. It is also important that the EIP projects reach their objectives, in particular the social ones, or else they risk to collapse. For instance, local jobs must be created, and involvement of women and young people is very important. On the other hand, EIP success does not rely on costly technologies. 5 key elements will support proper implementation of an EIP project. One has to establish benchmarks. One has to prepare an appropriate master plan. One should be conducting a recipe in individual companies. It is necessary to provide the necessary infrastructure, and you must have a committed and effective park management. Thailand's experience with developing eco-industrial towns show that EIP strategies will definitely be a key element in the development of such towns. Finally, while different names exist for similar concepts, we have eco-industrial park, green industrial park, eco-industrial towns, low-carbon industrial zones, sustainable industrial areas, they are equivalent in meaning. So countries can select the name that suits them best. The important thing is the concept and what it means, and not the name. Going back now to plenary sessions, today's first session on the winner's circle. Started with chemical leasing. This is something that shifts the focus from increasing sales volume of chemicals towards selling the services of those chemicals. The chemical supplier can make a profit with less chemicals. UNIDO has supported the application and dissemination of this business model in various sectors. Awareness raising is crucial to the further upscaling of the business model. We heard about chemical leasing being applied in Sri Lanka's farming sector on potatoes, paddy rice, and vegetables. Overall, there were considerable gains made in reducing pesticide use and increasing yields. The Thai company Grow has worked on reducing the use of toxic chemicals in the packaging industry through the use of rice straw, a commonly produced waste, as we know, in rice-growing regions. After joining UNIDO's Clean Tech program, Grow was able to improve and upscale their product to a commercial level and to improve their business and marketing skills. Staying with Thailand, the Thai company Tom Cassava wanted to provide an environmentally sustainable solution for residues from cassava farming, which are often burnt, while creating an additional revenue stream for farmers. Their product, based on activated carbon produced from cassava stumps, won the top Global Clean Tech Innovation Program Award for small and medium-sized enterprises in Thailand. Lastly, Fab Labs from Santiago, Chile, presented their emerging approach, which seeks to reimagine and apply new design concepts based on and reflecting the rapid changes in what constitutes autonomy, knowledge, and information generation, applying a systemic approach to design and development. The concept applies new approaches to design, the idea of ownership and citizen participation. It is also grounded in trying to better understand consumers through, among other things, using more refined data. Furthermore, it turns the concept of consumption to make it more participatory. Then again, we got into the parallel sessions, and here I will start with the session that dealt with greening investments along the Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI, so-called. The BRI was launched in 2013 to improve the connections and facilitate commercial exchanges between China and its neighboring countries. Additionally, the BRI supports the economic growth of the more than 60 countries along the road by developing infrastructures and accelerating their industrialization. The BRI doesn't address just classical infrastructure like roads and communication. Energy generation, water supply and treatment, as well as sustainable industrialization are also covered. For instance, China is promoting the construction of underground wastewater treatment plants with reduced environmental impacts, for instance, in terms of land utilization. On the energy side, investments are being made to, for instance, improve the efficiency and environmental performance of a coal-fired power station in Pakistan. Investments are also being made in energy-related R&D, for instance, research into the potential impacts of solar panels throughout their life cycle. Promoting green infrastructure along the BRI faces several challenges, unsurprisingly. Financing is a very important one, particularly because there is a gap between the usual projects financed in developing countries and the large projects that China wants to develop under the BRI framework. Other challenges, relatively usual in international cooperation projects, include legal issues and cultural differences. However, all the countries concerned by the BRI are making great efforts to green the BRI's infrastructure. Thailand's Eastern Economic Corridor was discussed. This is an idea that also illustrates the concept of developing multiple green infrastructures along communication networks. The government plans to build a high-speed railway connection between the different airports and harbors located near Bangkok, and to develop eco-industrial parks in special economic zones. To allow benchmarking of these industrial parks, the international framework on EIPs that was mentioned earlier will be used. The next parallel session was discussing eco-towns and sustainable cities, starting with a little bit of a definition. An eco-industrial town is the area where industry and households
that are put to us. I think that they give us the opportunity to work in future on these questions to answer them. In a project as large as this, many people were involved, and I just want to give my vote of thanks to, of course, as I said already, to the UNIDO team that in the preparation were led by Stefan and Nilguan Tas. Thank you very much for that. And also to my team that were led by Mrs. Marit Nilses, and a number of staff worked, but and I have. I'm not going to, list them all here, but I need to single out Ms. Kanda, because without her, many of these things will not fit into the picture. And of course, I need to thank collectively to our colleagues in Conference Management Unit and security and provision of food and coffee breaks, etc. So I really want to thank them all in terms of preparation of the environment for this successful work. And as always, the conference really relies on the inputs from moderators, speakers, and participants. And I think we have gotten a really excellent set of speakers and participants this time around. And we thank you sincerely all for your contributions. And I hope you will find ways to come back to ESCAP with UNIDO as well. And that this will be a very great start for us working towards greening industry and other activities as much as possible. Thank you very much.
And now, with some final thanks, and the first ones go to our actual host, in a way, the Ministry of Industry of Thailand, for which we, in particular the Minister, we thank a lot for their support and their help in setting this up. Then, of course, to ESCAP, and in particular to Mia and Marit. Thirdly, I would like to thank the UNIDO team, both in the headquarters as well as in the regional office in Bangkok. I am very tempted not to pick out any individuals, but I just can't do that without thanking on the headquarter team Nilgun Tas, who did an incredible job of putting everything together. It wasn't actually me, truly. She is the one who made that conference happen, and that was really an amazing feat. So. And our colleague here in Thailand, Soksiri, I don't know if she's in the room. Yes. Again, without you, wouldn't have happened. Thank you so much. Of course, also great thanks to the volunteers we had here, as well as the exhibitors, to the participants, to all of you, including the busy ministers and vice ministers, state secretaries, ambassadors, the permanent missions in Bangkok. All of those have spent substantial parts of their time and shown interest in this program, and we are very thankful for all of you who have been here. The moderators and speakers, in particular, our keynote speaker, Linda Godfrey, who did an excellent job in introducing not only the concept of circular economy, but almost, but not quite, rendering the whole conference obsolete by giving us already so many details when she started. And I should include in these things very specifically also our rapporteur, Ned. Thank you very much to the interpreters up there. Thank you so much for your support. And finally, the video crew and the team for the outreach. And with that, I think I can declare this 5th Green Industry Conference closed, and Mia knows, of course, what happens now. Closed. Thank you. It was a pleasure. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Excellent summary.
Speed up here.
Maybe I'll just add again a reminder that the buses tomorrow for the field trip will be parking outside the flagpoles from 6:30 and they will leave at 7 o'clock sharp. Thank you.
It was a great